President Trump in Asia.
People of faith who are found praying or holding a religious book of any kind are now detained, tortured.
Blistering words for human rights violations in North Korea. Undercover videos.
We, as procurement technicians, got our bonuses based on organ.
More controversial footage alleging the sale of baby body parts. We'll talk to David Daleiden, the pro-life activist who released them. Sean Spicer.
That's what keeps you grounded, is to know that somehow that this is all for a greater good, a greater purpose.
More of my one-on-one interview with the former White House press secretary. And put down your phone. The Holy Father's call to focus more on Mass. We'll have a report from Rome. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A sweeping rebuke of North Korea's abortion and Christian persecution practices by President Donald Trump, and a plea to the entire world. Don't supply, support, or accept the North Korean regime. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports on the 6th day of the president's 5-country Asia trip. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. We often hear about North Korea's nuclear program and erratic missile test, but we don't often hear details about the country's human rights abuses. Today, the president described the reality of life for citizens in North Korea, including Christians.
Christians and other people of faith who are found praying or holding a religious book of any kind are now detained, tortured, and in many cases, even executed. North Korean women are forced to abort babies that are considered ethnically inferior. And if these babies are born, the newborns are murdered.
President Trump cites the example of one child who was born to a Chinese father. The baby was deemed impure and unworthy to live. So the president is asking, why would China support North Korea? And he's calling on the country to apply greater pressure through sanctions. President Trump has some specific requests for China. He wants the country to limit its ties to North Korea and expel any North Korean workers. It would be a big blow to North Korea since China is the country's largest trading partner. Lauren?
Mark, the president highlighted human rights abuses in North Korea. Will he demand that China end its human rights abuses?
White House officials have said that if he were to confront China's President Xi Jinping about human rights or democratic reforms, he would likely do it privately. We do know the communist government has policies that include forced abortions and sterilizations, and for years enforced a strict one-child policy.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The U.S. Department of Agriculture releases a policy on religious freedom that does not discriminate against anyone based on their beliefs on marriage and sexuality. The policy resolves threats made against a family-owned meat-packing plant in Michigan, which inspectors threatened to shut down after the family left religious materials in the break room. A new policy from the Trump administration makes it harder for Americans to visit Cuba. Dozens of Cuban businesses with ties to the country's military are now off limits to U.S. citizens. President Obama restored diplomatic relations with the communist country in 2015. We question White House counselor Kellyanne Conway as pro-life groups fight to save the adoption tax credit. Right now, the House GOP tax plan scraps that help for families who face tens of thousands of dollars in adoption expenses. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The March for Life tells me the optics on this issue are horrible. A U.S. Bishops Committee tells lawmakers the adoption tax credit sends an important message that our country and society value life. But Kellyanne Conway tells us the current tax bill, which increases the child credit from $1,000 to $1,600, would help all American families, not just those that adopt.
I will tell parents everywhere that the president's vision would include a child care tax credit, an expanded child care tax credit for most Americans per child per year.
Democrats on the House's tax writing committee tried to add back the adoption tax credit, but Republicans shot it down. The adoption tax credit actually was part of the GOP's 1994 contract with America, and Republican Senator Ted Cruz wants to keep it.
In terms of cost, the adoption tax credit is not a terribly costly provision, and I think given the important values that are reflected in it, it should be preserved.
The IRS says about 64,000 families in 2015 took the adoption tax credit, which caps at roughly $13,000. Representative Chris Smith is the co-chair of the Pro-Life Caucus, and he's urging Speaker Ryan to keep that tax credit. Pro-life lobbyists tell me they hope Chairman Kevin Brady of the Ways and Means Committee will bring back the adoption tax credit this week. And Warren, Brady himself is the father of 2 adopted sons.
Another part of the GOP tax bill is scrapping the Johnson Amendment. Tell us about that. Is that staying?
The GOP bill would allow pastors at the pulpit to endorse or condemn political candidates while keeping their tax-exempt status, an attempt to protect churches from what they call the chilling effect of being targets of the IRS. Democrats countered with an amendment of their own to keep the Johnson restrictions in place, but that failed to pass out of the tax committee today. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you. Vice President Mike Pence and Second Lady Karen Pence arrive in Sutherland Springs, Texas. It's the site of the worst mass shooting in the history of the Lone Star State. The second couple is meeting with victims and their families and attending a prayer vigil this evening. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us with more. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. About a dozen of the shooting victims remain in the hospital days after the gunman opened fire at the town's First Baptist Church, killing 26. We now know those include a mother and her unborn baby. Authorities in Texas have released the names of the victims today. The victims range from infants to children to adults in their 70s. The shooting is raising concerns across the country about church security. Today I spoke with Carl Chin, a security expert who works with faith groups to protect communities from violent attacks. Chin is in Sutherland Springs to help in the aftermath of the shooting. He tells me that community is stunned.
The thing that really got me is there's so many people saying it'll never happen here. Well, you see, this is a very small town. You saw as I was walking across the street, there's not even a stoplight. There's only a flashing yellow light that I can hopefully show you there. There just isn't much in this town. And you know what, Wyatt? It happened here. It can happen other places.
Investigators are also learning more about the shooter, Devin Kelly, who died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound Sunday. Authorities say he made death threats against his superiors in the Air Force in 2012. Friends of Kelly on Facebook also note disturbing material on his page, preaching atheism and posting violent gun videos. Now, in terms of security, the Archdiocese of San Antonio tells me they are working with their parishes to keep the faithful safe and to come up with emergency plans. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting. Thank you, Wyatt. Democrats sweep Virginia and New Jersey governor's races, and incumbent big city mayors also fare well on election night. In New Jersey, Democrat Phil Murphy overcame Republican Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno, and in Virginia, Democrat Ralph Northam defeated Republican Ed Gillespie. Democrats believe the wins give them the momentum they need ahead of midterm elections next year. FEMA is rethinking its policy of denying aid to churches, synagogues, and mosques after 3 churches in Texas file a federal lawsuit following Hurricane Harvey. President Trump says he supports the churches. FEMA pays for repairs to religious schools and community centers, but not churches. Pro-independence activists in Catalonia fail in their attempt at a general strike, but protesters blocked roads and stopped trains anyway, forcing huge traffic jams throughout the northeast region of Spain. They are protesting the arrest of ousted Catalan government officials and others who are in favor of independence. The Syrian army releases footage of its fight against the Islamic State militants near the country's border with Iraq. Last week, Syria retook a major eastern city from ISIS. Pope Francis makes an appeal, put down your cell phones and focus on Jesus at Mass.
Non solo dei fedeli, anche di alcuni preti e anche vescovi. Ma per favore.
Per favore, please. The Holy Father made remarks during today's general audience. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, this is obviously an issue that bugs the Pope. Tell us what else he said.
Yeah, Lauren, it is a little curious, but I guess we all have to admit that in our enthusiasm nowadays for photographing and filming almost every moment of our lives, that has kind of reached saturation point, and our no-nonsense pontiff isn't shying away from pointing it out. So this morning at the general audience, he chastised all of us, including priests and bishops, saying, please, Mass is not a show. We need to remember that it's about focusing on the passion and resurrection of our Lord. And when the celebrant says, lift up our hearts, he's not saying lift up our phones and take a picture. Lauren, are you with me?
Yes, I'm just taking some pictures of myself. I get it. I completely get what the Pope is saying. I think that this becomes so pervasive in our culture. You know, the Pope also announced, I understand, his theme for his weekly audiences. What is that?
Yes, he talked about beginning a new series of catechesis focusing on the Eucharist. And he mentioned how Mass is the very heart of the Church and the source of life. And he talked about how many martyrs have given up their lives defending the Eucharist. And he talked about how when we partake of the body and blood of Jesus, we pass with him from death to life.
In other Vatican news, can you give us an update on the story that we covered with you yesterday about John Paul I's path to possible sainthood?
Absolutely. So we have confirmation that the Congregation for the Causes of Saints yesterday voted unanimously in favor of the heroic virtues of Pope John Paul I. So that's the last act before Pope Francis signs a decree, which is expected shortly, which would make him venerable. The next step is for him to be declared blessed, and for that, a miracle that has been attributed to him needs to be approved. And the step after that would be canonization, an eventual canonization declaration that he is a saint. And for that, a second miracle would be needed. However, Pope Francis could waive that requirement, as he did with Pope John XXIII.
I remember from yesterday's story that he had only been in office for a little over a month. Thank you so much, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thanks, Lauren.
Coming up, more of my one-on-one conversation with former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
So as a Catholic and a Christian, I wake up every day saying, was I the best person that God put me on this earth to be? Can I be better?
It is time for us to come together as one united people.
1 year ago today, November 8th, Donald Trump is elected 45th President of the United States. He addressed supporters in New York shortly after receiving a concession call from Hillary Clinton. Former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer is giving us his thoughts on the last year and the challenges he faced. In part 2 of our interview, Spicer tells me about the president's love of Twitter. Donald Trump's Twitter, how big of a problem is it?
Well, I think you can look at it in one way, but I think, again, considering the fact that he won an election, I would look at it the opposite. I know it drives a lot of people crazy, but at the end of the day, it was largely a successful tool that allows them to communicate directly with the American people. It's a way that he can ensure that, you know, that he can say what he wants, how he wants it, when he wants it.
And that's what his base likes, is
that
right? They do,
because I think what people were tired of the last election is being told what issues were important by the media and having a lot of politicians that were very scripted by talking points. And what Trump offered was a degree of authenticity that people hadn't seen in a long, long time.
Over the weekend, Saturday Night Live performed a skit of Sarah Sanders, who's your successor, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
It was really brutal.
Well, I think that between Saturday Night Live, the LA Times, quote, Pulitzer Prize winning...
Horsey, David Horsey. Let's just update that Sarah Sanders was called a chunky soccer mom. Horsey published an apology for his body-shaming comments.
It is, again, this gets back to this double standard. I think that the media loves to talk about all this concern they have for women, for bullying, for whatever, but when they do it, it's not the same. How many of those same anchors that have called out the president and conservatives stood up and said what this, quote, Pulitzer Prize winning person from the Los Angeles Times was wrong? I mean, how many of those mainstream journalists that have this faux outrage over and over again when this LA Times reporter made fun of Sarah's appearance, when Saturday Night Live mocked it, said this has gone too far? Zero. Where are the folks at NBC, CNN, Politico, Washington Post calling this out?
How good did it feel on the Emmys to get up there and play Melissa McCarthy?
Well, with all due respect, she was. I mean, I didn't play anybody. I played me, and I think that got largely lost in this. Is that I think that the idea that somehow I was playing anybody, they played me. I played me.
Okay, gotcha.
And so I just want to be clear on the intellectual property on that. It is me that people were playing. So I don't.
I was kidding. But did it feel good to do that?
I mean, look, the White House was an unbelievable honor. It's great to have that privilege.
President Trump called journalists enemies of the American people. Is that true?
I'm not. I think that he's entitled to his view. I think we have. Look, I think a free press is critical to a democracy. I think there are some members of the media who have an agenda, who are unbelievably focused on a narrative that attacks the right, that attacks people of faith. You know, there are folks on the right that go out there, and that's the beauty of a democracy and a free press.
When you stood behind the podium as press secretary on January 20th and you lashed out at the media saying the crowd size was large, you were immediately attacked. People called you, actually called for your firing on that day, on your very first day. Right. You got that a lot. Do you regret that? Do you regret coming out and punching so hard?
So this is how I wake up every day. I think that as a person, but also as a Catholic and a Christian, I wake up every day saying, was I the best person that God put me on this earth to be? Can I be better? And I think that that's not just true with, interviews I gave or whatever, but it's interactions with my family, with complete strangers, and saying, could I have been nicer to that person? Could I have treated them better? That's what God asks us to do every day. And so I wake up every day and saying, could I have done something better? Did I do everything with the gifts that He has given me? And so the answer is, yeah, I set that day and probably every other day, including today, and I'll say, did I do the best job that I could have? Could I have been kinder? Could I have said something in a different way?
I asked this of you the last time you were here. You said that your faith guided you every day while you were working there. The first thing you did every day was pray. Mm-hmm. Give me another example of your tenure there where your faith just kept you going through the day.
Well, I mean, obviously, you pray a lot in that job. And I think at tough moments, which there were plenty, that's what keeps you grounded, is to know that somehow that this is all for a greater good, a greater purpose, and that you just need to have your head on straight and to know what your priorities are. And that's what I had to constantly remind myself, is that there's a plan, and I just need to trust God and know that as long as I know I'm doing the right things and listening to what He's telling me back, that I'll be good in all of this.
Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, new undercover video. Pro-life activist David Daleiden joins us to talk about what he says is a gruesome business. And Notre Dame gives in. A week after saying it won't provide free birth control, Notre Dame is changing its tune. Today is the feast of the Four Crowned Martyrs. It honors a group actually made of 9 saints killed because of their faith in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. The University of Notre Dame announces it will continue contraceptive coverage through an outside provider. This comes a little more than a week after saying it would end birth control coverage for employees and students. The university says it recognizes the different religions and convictions among its staff. For more information, including an email sent by the university to employees, Go to CatholicNewsAgency.com. In a new video released this week, pro-life investigative journalist David Daleiden sits down with a former lab technician who says her research company bought fetal tissue from Planned Parenthood and employees were paid for it.
Now I'm looking back at it, I think that some of the staff at some of these clinics knew exactly what was going on, that they were getting compensated by, the tissue.
That's the voice of a former STEM Express employee explaining how she went to abortion clinics to pick up aborted baby parts. In July 2015, Daleiden's group, the Center for Medical Progress, released undercover videos allegedly proving aborted baby parts from Planned Parenthood were sold to research institutions. Joining us now is David Daleiden from our Orange County, California studios. David, welcome back to the program.
Lauren, it's great to be back with you.
Tell me about this latest installment, this video. You have been investigating Planned Parenthood for several years now.
Exactly. So the latest video series that CMP is putting out right now focuses on the eyewitness testimony of my good friend Holly O'Donnell, who is a very brave, very normal millennial woman who she found herself in an extraordinary situation when she was actually working for the company STEM Express in their baby parts harvesting business inside of some of the biggest Planned Parenthood clinics in Northern California for several months. She ultimately quit in disgust. She realized it was just blood money. But while she was there, she observed all kinds of ethical violations, medico-legal violations,
like
legal
what?
violations, and so she's a very brave whistleblower. Like the fact that they were harvesting and selling body parts for profit.
And
STEM Express was a profit-driven business. They shared a cut of it with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood leaked the private and patient medical files
Hang on, but
to the
one second.
unlicensed STEM Express contractors.
But Planned Parenthood is saying absolutely not, this didn't happen. Isn't that right? Are they responding in this case?
Holly's eyewitness testimony completely discredits and debunks Planned Parenthood's #1 talking point. Planned Parenthood's #1 excuse and fake defense that they've had for themselves, that all of this money they were getting for aborted baby body parts was, quote, just shipping costs. In reality, Planned Parenthood incurred no costs because all of the work was being done by the STEM Express workers inside their clinics. Planned Parenthood would literally get paid every time they provided a usable dead baby to STEM Express right there in the hallways of their clinics.
Is that you have on the record a former employee who saw this firsthand. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And you can find all this on our website at cmp.org.
David, there's a report out that Fusion GPS, which is the research firm used by the Clinton Foundation to create that controversial Trump dossier, was also hired to discredit you. Tell us about that.
Fusion GPS is a left-wing, pro-Planned Parenthood opposition research firm. They did this completely discredited fake dossier on President Trump. They also did a totally trumped-up dossier a couple of years ago trying to claim that all of my videos were doctored or edited or something silly like that. In reality, the video camera doesn't lie. What happened with that is that it provided the excuse that Planned Parenthood's friends in the establishment media needed to try to stop covering the videos, even though Planned Parenthood still can't claim that it's not their own leadership who's captured on camera, not speaking their own words that have now been recorded.
David Daleiden, Center for Medical Progress. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, the Louvre Abu Dhabi unveils itself to the world after a decade-long wait.
It's not the European point of view. It's a place to see the world from Abu Dhabi.
More than 600 pieces from Da Vinci, Monet, Picasso, and others will be on display in the Modernist Museum Saturday. It has artwork from all over the world, including a French stone statue of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. The museum is part of a 30-year agreement between Abu Dhabi and the French government. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll leave you tonight with more images from today's general audience at the Vatican. And remember, put those cell phones down. Good night, and God bless you.